Today we're going to talk about common questions going around about pre-emergence, and we're about to start right now. Hi everyone, Rob, the average long guy. Thanks for tuning in. So today I want to talk about pre-emergence. I'm seeing different questions about pre-emergence this time of year, so I want to answer a few of them. But before I begin, I want to talk about what a pre-emergent is. It's basically a chemical you put down on your turf, and it creates a barrier that inhibits the weeds from coming up to your turf. That's all it is. It doesn't kill existing weeds, remember that. So if you have existing weeds, a pre-emergent will not work for that. So a pre-emergent has to be applied 2, 3, or 4 times a year, depending on the brand. What happens is, once it forms that barrier, it will prevent most weeds from coming up. It doesn't stop all weeds. No pre-emergent on the market stops all weeds. So I wanted to make that clear. So question number 1 that I see going around out there is a podiamine app. Do I put down 1 teaspoon per gallon per 1,000 square foot? That's not how podiamine works. The way it works is that you have to calibrate your sprayer, and everybody's sprayer is different depending on nozzle type, whether it's battery powered or manual powered. So essentially you have to calibrate your sprayer, and I made a video on how to calibrate a backpack sprayer and how to apply podiamine 65 WTG. I'll list those in the description. So essentially you need to calibrate your sprayer and determine how many gallons it takes to put out over 1,000 square foot, and you take that and then you add your appropriate chemical. So say for example it takes 2 gallons to cover 1,000 square foot, then you would have to accommodate that 2 gallons per 1,000 square foot. Now it's not a set rule where 1 gallon per 1,000 square foot. It all depends on your spreader calibration, so I wanted to make that clear. The second question I see going around is it better to apply granular or liquid? Well, that all depends on your preference. Both have their advantages and disadvantages. The beauty about granular application is that it's very user friendly. You don't have to buy any extra piece of equipment. All you need is a broadcast spreader. So essentially you put your granulars in your broadcast spreader and you set the appropriate dial and you move along. The main disadvantage or disadvantages of granular apps is coverage wise. If you don't set your spreader right, what's going to happen is that you're going to have gaps in coverage, and those gaps in coverage are going to allow weeds to pop up. So it's important to get good coverage on your granular apps. But as good as your coverage is, it's going to be hard to hit the corners, such as along driveways or patios. So you may have some gaps in coverage there. And also be mindful with granular apps, they are susceptible to wash off. So if you have a heavy rainfall, what's going to happen is that the heavy rain is just going to wash away those granulars. But the flip side to that is granulars need to be watered in. Stop, Eddie. I'm going to send you inside. Stop. No. The flip side to that is that granulars need to be watered in, but they need to be watered in very lightly. Depending on the type of brand you buy, you may have to come back around and water it multiple times in order to dissolve those granulars. So keep that in mind when you're putting out granular apps. Now liquid applications are a whole different ballgame. First off, the advantages is you get very good coverage. And if you're using the marking dye, you're going to get even coverage throughout your whole turf, and you don't have to really worry about gaps in coverage unless you intentionally put the gaps in coverage. The only problem with liquid apps is it takes a little bit more calculation and you need a little bit more equipment. For example, it's more efficient if you have a backpack sprayer for a liquid app, because if you're going to spray, let's say 10,000 square foot lawn, and you're going to use a pump sprayer, that's going to take you forever. It can be done, but it's going to take you forever. So I highly recommend if you do liquid apps, you get a backpack sprayer. Now with liquid apps, there's different products out there. The most common one by far is podiamine. And what I love about podiamine is that you buy a huge jug. It's really inexpensive. It's something in the range of like $60. I don't recall on top of my head. But essentially, you take a little bit of that, mix it in. Of course, after you calibrate your sprayer. So you mix it in and then you just spray appropriately as needed. That combined with a marking dye will definitely give you good coverage. The other thing about liquid apps is you're going to have to invest in the equipment needed. As I mentioned, backpack sprayer, you're going to need a scale. Some liquid pre-emergents say you can use teaspoons or tablespoons, but I find that very hard to be exact because, for example, if I'm eating a plate of food, I'm going to take a tablespoon of rice. My tablespoon of rice is different than maybe, say, someone else's tablespoon of rice. I may take a huge mountain of rice in a tablespoon and just put it in my mouth, while someone just takes just enough. So you get the idea. So a scale is very beneficial to have. Another question I see out there is, when is a good time to put down my pre-emergent? Well, that all depends on where you live exactly. You see, pre-emergents need to go down at really 2 temperature ranges. In the fall, when temperatures drop to about 70 degrees and they stay down there for about 3 to 4 days, that's a good time to put down your pre-emergent. And in the spring, when temperatures in the soil rise to above 55 degrees and it stays that way for 3 or 4 days, that's the best time to put down a pre-emergent. Now, it's not difficult to calculate soil temps, but the problem is you have to invest in a soil temp probe, and you essentially put that in the ground and you get your soil temps that way. Another way to get soil temps is just basically go to Google and type in soil temps in my area. This will give you a good estimate on when to put down your pre-emergent. Some people go by dates, but the problem with dates is that the seasons change. For example, here in Georgia, we're having ups and downs in the weather pattern right now. So one day it was like 70 degrees, next day it's down to 30. So it gets a little tricky when you go by dates. Also keep in mind with either liquid or granular apps, usually 2 apps are required. You can get by with 1. If you use 2 apps, you're going to have good coverage. So you go by soil temperatures. Remember, in the fall, when temperatures drop below 70 degrees, and in the spring when temperatures start rising above 55 degrees, that's when you put down your pre-emergent. Another question I get asked about pre-emergence is, can I put down a pre-emergent if I have new sod? If I planted, let's say, sod last year, I would say no, because the argument is you need to allow a good entire growing season for the roots to dig into the dirt before you put down a pre-emergent. Now, some people would say a year, some people would say just an entire season, entire growing season. I say be safe and wait a whole year before you put down a pre-emergent. Until then, you're just gonna have to either pull the weeds or spot spray them as needed. When you lay down the sod, the roots of the sod need to dig down to the ground, and if you apply a pre-emergent, it's gonna affect those roots, and the roots won't be able to go down and dig deep. And what's gonna happen is that as you're mowing, or if you decide to mow low, you may end up ripping out the sod if the roots did not have a chance to dig in. Another question out there is, should I apply pendimethalin or dithiopyr? Well, a pre-emergent is a pre-emergent. What you choose to apply is really up to you. So in the fall, what I do is I put down a granular app, usually a pendimethalin ingredient, and usually get that off of Let's Go 007. But then I come back around in about 4 to 6 weeks and I apply a prodiamine 65 WDG. The granulars combined with the liquid coverage will protect me for the entire winter season. But then come spring, usually around, for me in Georgia, around February, I would put down a granular app. Same thing with pendimethalin, but then I come back around and this time I hit it with dithiopyr. The dithiopyr I use is the dithiopyr 40 WSB, which stands for water soluble bags. I'm going to make a video on exactly how to apply that coming up soon. But the reason why I choose to change up my pre-emergence in the fall and spring is because prodiamine has a yearly max you don't want to go over. And the same thing with dithiopyr. You don't want to go over those yearly max. And for me, it makes sense to put down the dithiopyr in the beginning around springtime, just when as crabgrass is starting to emerge. And the beauty about dithiopyr, even though it's listed as a pre-emergent, it does have a little bit of a post-emergent effect. It's really good against baby crabgrass, not mature crabgrass. So if you have crabgrass that's starting to come out the ground and it's a very small stage, dithiopyr should take care of that. But don't rely on dithiopyr to take care of the crabgrass. Just assume it's not, and if it does, great. But really you should be using it as a pre-emergent. Another question I see about podiamine is, should I go max on the application rates? Well, that's tricky. That's really up to you, but I would say no, because let's say you have a super rainy season where it's constantly raining all the time. And what's going to happen is that the rain is going to slowly wash away that chemical barrier. And if you went the max rate and you have a rainy season, you're not going to have any more wiggle room to reapply a podiamine. So usually I would say go with a 4 to 5 month control of podiamine, just to be safe, so that way you have some leeway if you ever need to reapply. Another question I see being asked is, can I scalp my yard if I put down the granular application 2 weeks before? The answer to that is really almost a no. It's almost unlikely that the granulars will actually dissolve fast enough to get into the soil before you scalp. So if you do plan to scalp, you want to make sure you applied your granular application weeks in advance, and you want to make sure it got watered in properly. Whether it's you're relying on Mother Nature or you decide to water it yourself, you want to make sure that your pre-emergent was watered in, and watered in very well before you decide to scalp. Because if you think about it, it makes sense. If you put down the granular and then you come back around and you scalp it 2 weeks later, there's a good chance you're going to suck up all those granules, and then your pre-emergent will be ineffective. Another question I see asked is, can I put down a granular pre-emergent if I see rain in the forecast? This will allow me to water it in. Well, the answer to that is it depends. If it's a light rainfall, yes, you can use that as a way to water your pre-emergent. But be careful if you're expecting a couple days of rain or a very heavy rainstorm. You don't want to risk the water washing away your granulars. So I think that pretty much explains itself. The last question I see is hills. If I put down the granular application on a hill, will it get washed away? That's a hard question to answer. It really depends on the slope of your hill. If you have a small hill and you apply a granular application on it, what's going to happen is that if it's not watered in right away, and if it's not allowed to actually go down into the soil, the granulars can wash away. But if you put down a granular app on a hill and you lightly hand water it in, that should allow some of it to actually get down a little deeper. And I would not rely on the rainstorm to actually water that in for you, because it may rain too much and then your granular apps may wash away. So you want to be careful with that. A workaround around hills is there's only 2 ways. As I mentioned, you put down your granular app and you hand water it in or lightly water it in and stop. And then you want to come back in a few hours and lightly water it in again. This is just a way to prevent it from washing away. The other workaround is you apply a liquid app. See, liquid apps are so good because they cannot really be washed away. I mean, technically they can, but it's very difficult because with liquid apps, once you apply it, it does need to be watered in order to be pushed down into the soil, because that chemical barrier needs to get past the thatch layer into the soil to form that barrier. So liquid apps are a way to cover the hilly areas in your yard if you happen to have it. I hope you found this information useful. If you did, give it a like, and stay tuned for more videos. With that, thanks for watching. Take care.